I never thought my own son would order me to wake up at 5 in the morning just to serve breakfast in bed to his wife. Yet, that was exactly what happened the night before everything changed. My name is Joanna Miller, and I am 71 years old. Last night, while Brian slept peacefully down the hallway, I quietly reached for his phone and moved his alarm from 6:30 to 4. Then I placed a small handwritten note beside it. The words were simple: "Time to make coffee for your wife. A real husband should know how." 6 months ago, Brian and his wife Lacy showed up at my door with two oversized suitcases and anxious eyes. They said they had lost their apartment after falling behind on rent and promised their stay would only be temporary. They just needed time to get back on their feet. I believed them. I welcomed them into my home because that is what mothers do. The house had felt so empty since my husband Thomas passed away 3 years earlier. At first, everything seemed normal. I cooked their meals, I washed their clothes, I even enjoyed having company again. But slowly, small requests turned into expectations, and expectations turned into commands. My son, who once thanked me for every little thing as a boy, now spoke to me as if I were a living housekeeper. Lacy followed his lead as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I kept telling myself that once they found jobs, things would settle. Instead, each day felt heavier than the last. And standing in the quiet of my kitchen that night, staring at the glowing numbers on Brian's phone, I realized something deep inside me had finally snapped. That was the moment I decided I would no longer live as a servant in my own home. Before everything fell apart, I used to believe that the greatest gift a mother could give her child was unconditional sacrifice. For most of my life, that belief shaped every decision I made. I grew up in a working-class family and married my husband Thomas when I was 22. We bought our small house in Cedarfield back in 1982. It was old and needed work, but it was ours. Thomas worked in construction, and I worked long shifts at a packaging plant. Together, we saved every dollar we could to build a stable life for our only child, Brian. When Brian was 8, he came down with pneumonia. The doctor visits piled up. The medicine was expensive. Thomas and I took extra shifts, and I sold the pearl earrings Thomas had given me on our 5th anniversary. It was not even a question. My son needed care, and I would give up anything to make sure he got it. That memory used to warm my heart. Now I sometimes wonder if it was the first step in teaching him that I would always rescue him, no matter the cost. As Brian grew older, the sacrifices became bigger. At 17, he wanted to study automotive technology at a private vocational school because he believed it would give him a better chance at a solid career. The tuition was huge, and we did not have the savings. So Thomas and I remortgaged the house. For 2 years, we worked overtime until our legs ached and our backs burned. Brian attended classes, but 3 months before graduation, he decided he no longer liked the work. He quit without finishing. We never recovered the money. Thomas passed away unexpectedly when Brian was 24. It shattered me. I spent nights staring at the empty side of the bed, unable to sleep. But I still kept going because Brian needed support. When Brian wanted to buy his first motorcycle, the bank denied him credit. I sold my wedding jewelry to help him. He promised to repay me, but never did. It became a pattern, a request, a promise, then silence. When Brian married Lacy, I helped pay for the entire wedding. Flowers, food, venue, photographs, all of it. I used money I had saved for my retirement. I wanted him to start his new life with pride. During his wedding speech, he said every good thing in his life came from me. He said he would always protect me and take care of me, just like I had taken care of him. I believed every word. I held them close. And for years, I thought those sacrifices were proof of love. I never imagined they would one day become the very reason he felt entitled to take advantage of me in my own home. In the beginning, I convinced myself that Brian and Lacy were simply adjusting to a difficult chapter in their lives. Anyone would feel embarrassed moving back in with a parent. I understood that. So when Lacy asked if I could do a little extra laundry because she was exhausted from searching for work, I agreed. When Brian asked if I could prepare his favorite meals to help him stay motivated for job interviews, I agreed too. It felt harmless, temporary, almost motherly. But the tone slowly changed. Requests became routines, and routines became obligations. Lacy began leaving her clothes in careless piles around the house, assuming I would pick them up. Brian would sit at the table, scrolling through his phone, and tell me what he wanted for dinner without even looking up. Not asking, telling. It was a small shift, but a powerful one. I could feel myself being pushed into a corner I hadn't even realized existed. Soon, the demands grew bolder. Lacy insisted on specific ingredients that cost far more than I could afford on my fixed income: smoked salmon, organic honey, imported tea leaves. When I said those items were not in my budget, she gave me a soft smile and said it was important for her health. Brian backed her up each time. He said a good mother should want her family to be comfortable. It was the way he said it that stung, as if my worth depended on how well I served them. Then came the chores that crossed every line: cleaning their bedroom daily, hand-washing delicate clothing, scrubbing baseboards, vacuuming under their bed every morning. I caught myself standing in their doorway one afternoon, holding a basket of their laundry, and feeling the sharp realization that I no longer recognized my own life. I was 71 years old, working like a full-time housekeeper for two healthy adults who spent their free time relaxing in front of the television. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that once they saved enough money, they would move out and things would finally settle. But deep down, another truth was forming, something far more unsettling. The more I gave, the more they took, and nothing I gave them seemed to have a limit. Everything reached a new level the night Brian stood up from the dining table and delivered his final order, as if he were speaking to an employee. "Tomorrow, you need to wake up at 5 and bring Lacy her breakfast in bed. She prefers warm milk, coffee, fresh fruit, and French toast. Make sure it's ready before she wakes." His voice was cold, matter-of-fact, as if my age, my exhaustion, and my dignity no longer existed. Lacy did not say a word. She simply smoothed her hair and smiled, the kind of smile that told me she fully expected to be served. I stood there holding a stack of dirty dishes, feeling something collapse inside me. After everything I poured into Brian's life, he now spoke to me like I was an obligation instead of a mother. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet the storm inside my chest. Memories of my sacrifices came rushing back. Nights at the factory, long shifts, missed meals, selling jewelry, paying for school, weddings, emergencies, all of it done with love, all of it erased in one sentence spoken at my own dining table. At 3 in the morning, I rose from bed with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I walked down the hall into Brian's room while he slept. His phone sat on the nightstand, glowing faintly. I picked it up, changed his 6:30 alarm to 4, and left a small handwritten note beside it. The words were simple: "Time to make coffee for your wife. A real husband should know how." The morning after I changed Brian's alarm, I expected anger. What I did not expect was the avalanche of truth that would follow. At 6:30, he came stomping into the kitchen with wild hair and red eyes, demanding to know who had touched his phone. I told him it must have been a technical glitch. He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then he warned me never to enter his room again without permission. The word permission stung like a slap, but what happened next opened my eyes in a way I could never undo. Lacy walked downstairs wearing a fitted dress and jewelry I had never seen before, a rose gold bracelet, tiny diamond earrings. She spoke casually about wanting eggs Benedict with smoked salmon for breakfast. When I explained I did not have the ingredients, she told me to go buy them immediately. Brian handed me $80 and told me to hurry because Lacy had an important appointment and needed a proper meal. On my way to the grocery store, something inside me shifted. $80 was almost a tenth of my monthly grocery budget. I'd lived frugally my entire life, yet these two spent money like it grew on trees. And as I walked the aisles searching for overpriced salmon and fancy spices, something clicked. Their shopping deliveries, the new clothes, the perfume bottles, the espresso machine they installed in their room, none of it matched the income they claimed to have. When Lacy returned home, I overheard her on the phone laughing to a friend. She said they had found the perfect setup. Living with me meant no rent, no utilities, and no food costs. She bragged that they were saving $1,800 a month, enough for a down payment on a house in 2 years. She even said I was so easy to manipulate that they might be able to stay for years without paying a thing. The words hit me harder than anything Brian had ever said. I stood frozen in the hallway, holding a bag of ingredients I could barely afford, while listening to the woman my son married refer to my home and my life as part of her savings plan. Later that week, my friend Marjorie visited. She had lived through something similar with her own son. When I told her what I overheard, she looked at me with grim understanding. She said this was not simply ungrateful behavior, it was financial abuse, and it only grew worse when ignored. Her words settled in me like a weight. For months, I'd convinced myself I was helping my family. But now I finally saw the truth. I was not helping them stand back up. I was allowing them to stand on top of me. After talking with Marjorie, I realized I could not rely on hope or intuition anymore. I needed proof. I needed clarity. And most of all, I needed a plan. That night, after Brian and Lacy left for work, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank notebook and wrote down every single thing that had happened over the past week. The chores they demanded, the groceries I paid for, the errands I ran, the comments I overheard, every detail went onto the page. The simple act of writing everything down changed something in me. Seeing the facts in black ink made the situation undeniable. This was not temporary inconvenience. This was systematic control. And now I understood that if I did nothing, the situation would only tighten around me until I had no space left to breathe. Marjorie urged me to look into my rights as the homeowner. I spent the next morning reading through articles online, and one thing kept appearing again and again. Adults who live in a home without paying rent or having any sort of lease are considered tenants at will. In many states, the homeowner has the legal right to ask them to leave with a 30-day notice. It felt strange reading that my own son and his wife fell under that category. The more I learned, the more everything sharpened into focus. Brian and Lacy were not stuck. They were comfortable. They had discovered a life where all their income could go to luxuries while I carried the weight of their responsibilities. It was not kindness, it was exploitation. And for the first time in months, the question hit me with full force. If I did not take control now, then when? 2 days later, Brian came home from work with a new level of authority in his step. He sat down in the living room and called my name the way a supervisor might summon an employee. When I walked in, he handed me a sheet of paper covered in neat handwriting. "This is your new schedule," he said. His tone was calm but firm, as if the decision had already been made and my agreement was irrelevant. The list stunned me. Wake up at 5 every morning to prepare Lacy's breakfast, clean their bedroom daily, including hand-washing delicate clothing, iron their clothes on Sundays, deep clean the house twice a week, do all grocery shopping on a strict schedule, prepare 3-course dinners, keep the living room spotless in case they had unexpected visitors, and the final line struck me harder than all the rest. Ask permission before using the television room after 7 in the evening. I read the list twice before looking up. Brian waited for my reaction with an expression that made my stomach twist. He truly believed this was reasonable. Lacy appeared moments later wearing a new blouse with the price tag still dangling from the sleeve. She smiled sweetly and asked if I had reviewed the schedule. She said it would help us all live in harmony. Harmony. A word I once treasured now felt like a joke, because harmony meant no one felt discomfort, and I had been drowning in discomfort for months while they floated on top of the life I built. Holding that paper in my hands, something finally clicked. This was not temporary. This was not a rough patch. Brian and Lacy intended to make this arrangement permanent, and if I stayed silent, they would turn my home into a place where I no longer existed except to serve them. That weekend, Marjorie stopped by again. She had a seriousness in her eyes that made me set down the dish towel immediately. She told me she had done some checking on her own. A friend of hers worked at a nearby bank and had mentioned seeing Brian and Lacy at a car dealership. They had bought a red sports car. My heart dropped. I knew exactly how much they earned. There was no world in which they could afford that without cutting corners somewhere else. Then Marjorie pulled out a manila folder. Inside were photos she had taken quietly from her car. Brian signing papers next to the shiny red vehicle, Lacy holding a jewelry box outside a boutique, receipts she found in the trash behind my house, dinners worth more than I spent feeding myself for an entire week, spa treatments, designer clothing, all while telling me they could not afford rent or groceries. The final blow came when Marjorie told me that Brian had listed my home as his own on a loan application. He claimed to be the homeowner. He claimed he had no rent. He used my stability as leverage to secure credit he had no business getting. That was not only manipulative, it was dangerous. If he defaulted, they could come after my property. I felt sick. Truly sick. My hands shook as I held the evidence. For months, I had believed I was helping my son rebuild his life. Instead, he had used my home as a financial tool and my kindness as a shield. Marjorie reached across the table and squeezed my hands. "You need legal help," she said quietly. And she was right. The next morning, I called attorney Charles Henson, a lawyer who specialized in cases involving elder financial abuse. He listened patiently as I told my story. Then he told me something that felt like a lifeline. You have every legal right to ask them to leave with a 30-day notice. He explained the eviction process, 30 days notice, protected rights, clear boundaries. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control return to my chest. That afternoon, I signed the papers. Once the eviction papers were filed, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I was wrong. The next 30 days became a maze of emotional pressure tactics I never expected from my own family. Brian and Lacy moved through strategies like someone might flip through channels on a television searching for something that worked. At first came the anger. Brian slammed doors, accused me of betrayal, and insisted I was tearing the family apart. Lacy cried loud enough for the neighbors to hear, claiming she felt unsafe and unwanted. They blamed stress, work, exhaustion, anything except their own behavior. When anger failed, they switched to guilt. Brian reminded me of holidays we spent together. He talked about the time he broke his arm at 11 and how I held his hand through the hospital stay. Lacy spoke softly about wanting a close relationship with her future mother-in-law. They painted pictures of family harmony as if the last 6 months had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. Then came manipulation, phone calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Brian had told them I was growing senile and making irrational decisions. One cousin even suggested they stage a family intervention. I listened quietly to each of them and repeated the same sentence. You have not lived in my home. You do not know what has been happening. When guilt failed, they tried bargaining. Brian offered to pay rent, $600 a month, a number I knew he could not sustain. Lacy promised to take over household chores and insisted she would treat me like a queen. Their words sounded rehearsed, like lines learned from a script they hoped would move me. The final attempt was the cruelest. Late one night, Lacy came into my room with trembling hands. She said she was 6 weeks pregnant and begged me not to force them out. She said the baby needed me. I sat with her quietly and told her I hoped the pregnancy was healthy, but it changed nothing. A child deserved parents who could stand on their own feet. Her face hardened instantly. The tears vanished, she called me heartless, and stormed out of the room. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Each tactic they used only proved how right my decision had been. They were not trying to rebuild a family, they were trying to keep their comfort, and I was finally done being their safety net. The day the eviction papers were officially delivered felt strangely calm at first. I spent the morning watering my plants and brewing a cup of coffee the way I liked. No rushing, no 5 a.m. alarms, no whispered demands from down the hallway, just quiet. the kind of quiet I had forgotten existed. At exactly 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Attorney Charles Henson stood on my porch alongside a court officer. Their presence alone carried a weight I could feel in my chest. I invited them in and called Brian and Lacy to the living room. Brian walked in with the same casual confidence he always carried, but when he saw the envelopes in the officer's hands, the color drained from his face. Lacy lingered behind him, arms folded, an edge of suspicion in her eyes. The officers spoke clearly. By order of the state, Brian Miller and Lacy Miller are required to vacate this property within 30 days. These documents outline your rights and responsibilities during that period. Lacy snatched the papers and began scanning them frantically. "This is a mistake," she cried. "You cannot kick out your own family." Brian turned to me with disbelief, widening his eyes. His voice cracked between outrage and confusion. "Mom, how could you do this after everything I've done for you?" The irony of that statement hit me like a wave, but I kept my voice steady. "This is my home, and I will no longer live in it as a servant." Lacy's emotions shifted quickly from shock to fury. She shouted that I would regret this, that I would end up alone, that I belonged in a nursing home if I couldn't handle having family around. The officer calmly reminded them that threats would not change the legal process. Brian tried one final attempt, appealing to emotion. "We can fix this. We can start over. Don't do this." But the decision had been made long before this moment. I looked at them both and said the words I had been holding inside for months. "I choose peace." The rest was silence. The morning after the eviction notice was served felt like stepping into a different world. Brian and Lacy barely spoke to me. They stayed in their room most of the day, packing slowly and slamming doors often. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel the usual knot of fear in my stomach. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Space, quiet, a sense of ownership returning to the walls of my home. On the 7th day of their 30-day period, they left for a weekend trip. The moment their car backed out of the driveway, I locked the door behind them and exhaled a breath I did not know I had been holding. I walked from room to room, touching furniture, dusting shelves, rearranging small things that had been moved out of place. My house felt like it was waking up from a bad dream. I changed the sheets on my bed. I baked a small apple pie just for myself. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the neighborhood settle into its evening rhythm. It was so simple, so ordinary, and yet it felt like the greatest luxury in the world. The next week, I took a step I had been afraid to take for years. I joined a fitness class for seniors at the community center. The first session left my legs shaking and my heart pounding, but I laughed more than I had in months. I met a woman named Ruth who invited me to a gardening group. Another man named Stanley told me he liked my determination. It felt strange to be seen as a person again instead of a tool. I bought new curtains. I planted marigolds by the front walkway. I began reading before bed again, something I had stopped doing when Brian and Lacy controlled my evenings with their demands. Each small change was a piece of myself returning. As the 30 days passed, Brian occasionally tried to talk me out of the eviction, but I did not waver. Every time he spoke, I saw the chore list, the jewelry boxes, the expensive meals, the sports car, the lies, and I reminded myself that boundaries were not cruelty, they were protection. When moving day finally came, they loaded their belongings into the car without meeting my eyes. Lacy muttered under her breath. Brian paused long enough to say, "We will be back when things calm down." I answered simply, "Take care of yourselves." Then I closed the door behind them, and for the first time in years, I felt completely and unquestionably free. 2 years passed more quickly than I ever expected. Life did not suddenly transform into something magical, but it became steady, peaceful, and mine again. My mornings began with a quiet walk around the block. Some afternoons, I baked bread for the neighbors. I started volunteering at the thrift shop downtown and even took a short trip to the coast with Marjorie. It was the first vacation I had taken in more than a decade. During that time, Brian and Lacy built a new life of their own. They found a small rental apartment in a neighboring town. It was not luxury, but it was theirs. Brian finally committed to a stable job at an insurance firm. Lacy returned to hairstyling and eventually began taking evening classes to become a licensed cosmetologist. Without my home to cushion them, they were forced to grow up. The day their son Eli was born, Brian called me. His voice was quieter than I remembered, almost humbled. He said he wanted me to meet my grandson. I agreed, but I set clear boundaries. Visits would happen at my home during specific times. No surprise drop-ins, no expectations of childcare, no guilt tactics. Brian accepted every condition without hesitation. The first time I held Ali, he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine. Something warm settled in my chest. Not dependency or obligation, but a gentle reminder that love can still exist when boundaries are honored. Over the next year, Brian changed in small ways. He began speaking to me respectfully. He apologized sometimes, though not always graciously. He stopped asking for money. He brought groceries when he visited. These gestures were simple but sincere. As for Lacy, she kept her distance, but she was polite. That was enough for me. One evening, as Brian helped me carry potted plants to the porch, he paused and said, "Mommy, you did the right thing. If you had not pushed us out, I do not think we ever would have learned how to stand on our own." I looked at him, the boy I once held, the man he was finally becoming, and understood something important. Boundaries had not broken our family, they had saved it. Looking back now, I understand something I wish I had learned decades earlier. Love without boundaries is not love. It is surrender. And when you surrender long enough, the people you care about stop seeing you as someone to cherish and start seeing you as someone to use. The day I stood up for myself was not the day I lost my family. It was the day I finally reclaimed my place within it. If you are watching this and you feel your voice getting smaller or your worth fading into the background, I want you to remember this. You are never too old, too tired, or too late to take your life back. Your home, your time, and your dignity belong to you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you in any way, please like, share, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach those who need them most.